Well, hello again, it's David Willey, curator from the Tank Museum, here again, evidently not at the Tank Museum. It's a lovely spring day now in England, and this particular question and answers, I want to concentrate on one topic that a number of people have asked the questions on, which is about what do people wear inside a tank. Now, I can't cover, I'm afraid to say, every country, every variation on a theme, but fortunately I've been up in the attic, I've had a good old rummage around. I've managed to put together what is a reasonable collection of British tank suits, mainly centred around the Second World War. So we're going to talk through some of those ones. And for those of you who particularly like uniforms, one of the things we always love is the detailing, what makes it look authentic, etc., what's a real one. One of the things at the end of this video, there'll be stills of each of these uniforms with the label that I've photographed, so it won't be the best quality. As ever, we're doing these on the hoof, so please bear with us on all this, but hopefully it'll keep you entertained and we'll have a little bit more there for you to see on British tank suits. Now, I'll take you back, a little first thing first. In the First World War, British tank crewmen who go into action in tanks, they are issued, first of all, they just have service dress. They then very quickly seem to be issued with overalls. And those overalls, sadly at the Tank Museum, we've got what we can really identify as an original pair of First World War tank crew overalls. But we've seen a pair, a chap brought in some that are pretty much, they've got a great provenance to them. So with the First World War ones, if you look at them, they're collarless, fairly plain. The pair that came in that we were shown had a beautiful sort of russety brown colour, reddish brown colour to them. But these sorts of tank suits, these overalls, some people say they came from stocks from other parts, other services within Royal Flying Corps later on. But that idea of the general brown overalls, and if you look at some of them as well and look at the photographs, and that's always really worth studying the photographs, some of them are almost shiny with the amount of oil and muck they've got put on them over time when they're working in tanks. But overalls seem to be a sensible thing to wear. Number one, because it keeps your service dress, that 4-patch pockets and your trousers, it tends to keep those fairly clean, keeps the worst of the muck off them. And you can also see as well that straight away early on, there's a lot you can catch on a tank. So the fewer things you've got to be able to catch yourself on, hence this idea about when do you have things like a web belt on, when is that something that's going to catch? And later, certainly these become part of a problem, and you can see this as part of the design process. What can we do to stop the soldier having to have all these various little loops, belts, etc. that might catch on something, especially if he's trying to get out of a tank in a hurry. Now, I'm going to talk separately about headgear in tanks. We'll do that on a different video. So those first tank crewmen, if they walk away from the tank, they look very much like a normal soldier. In the summer, they wear shorts in the tanks. Sometimes you see them in shirt sleeves. Again, one of the other issues that's prevalent that comes out in the First World War, just true as tanks throughout history, which is that idea of the tank being a big metal box. Quite often it becomes something we call like a heat sink. In other words, if overnight it gets cold, it stays cold for a long, long time. Middle of winter it can get so cold that if you touch bare metal on the tank, you can stick to it. So they're obviously looking at trying to keep the guys warm. And the opposite effect, of course, is once you're in a tank, and again in the First World War, that whopping Great Dane with a 105 horsepower engine, pumping out huge amounts of heat right in the middle of the crew compartment. The other extreme is it gets ridiculously hot there as well. So again, accounts of guys in their shirt sleeves, they're stripped down almost to their underpants because of the heat inside the vehicle. So you've got those great big contrasts going on, and sometimes you can almost have those contrasts going on within 24 hours. So that overall effect, that idea of the overalls and what their sensible use in the First World War, into the post-war era, again, if you watch the Royal Tank Corps as it becomes in 1923, the chaps who served in the Tank Corps in the First World War, again, they tend to wear service dress, that 4-patch pockets in wool, normal serge trousers, and when they go into their tanks, they then put on overalls sometimes over top, or if they're doing dirty work, but again, time of year, unit, if it's a parade, you're in your number 2 service dress, this 4-patch service dress pockets thing. And throughout the 1920s, you can see in all those different sorts of photographs, pretty much it harks back to looking very much like those First World War guys in an awful lot of what they do. What does happen though is the Royal Tank Corps looks at, again, this fundamental practical thing. If you're in and out of tanks all the time, you inevitably get grease, muck, dirt on you. They are filthy beast tanks. They're always covered in mud. So one of the things that the Royal Tank Corps comes up with is a black two-piece denim overalls. Now these phraseologies we're going to use, denim, wool, serge, etc. Denim is basically a cloth that's woven, and you get, as in blue denim jeans, that two-tone effect. With the black denims, you don't get a two-tone so much, but it's just basically a cloth. It's not that wool, it's not as thick. And then in the 30s, they also issue something called, later in the 30s, denim overalls. What happens is the Tank Corps like the black because it hides a multitude of sins, it hides the dirt, and again you see that black being worn by famously the Panzerwolf, the German tank crew as well, because they're looking at the same sorts of issues. In Britain though, we don't go to people like Hugo Boss to design it, as Hitler does with the, or the Nazi party does with the Panzer wrap jacket, etc. But again, if you look at that, again looking at, touching on other countries, the Panzer wrap jacket, part of that is to hide the buttons. Part of it is to hide the fact so you haven't got things to be able to catch on if you're climbing in and out. Now in the late 1930s in Britain, we went from the service dress to battle dress blouse, and basically it was a two-part combination, smaller battle dress, and I've got one I'm going to put out here. The battle dress blouse was not universally liked initially. It was sort of a bit messy. And the battle dress is coming into service across the British Army when World War II breaks out, which is why on a number of photographs you'll see 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiment crew members wearing, in the same photograph, battle dress blouse, and some other people have still got that 4-patch service dress pockets on in the same photo at the same time. So it wasn't universally issued. Now this particular example, this one is, it goes through a number of changes in the war years as well to make it simpler. This is 1940 pattern. This particular one is stamped as being made in November of 1942. So again, you see the idea. It's a top half there underneath the battle dress trousers. These ones are actually Canadian, slightly different in the colouring you can see there. But that was what most tank crewmen ended up wearing for an awful lot of their time in the Second World War. And underneath that, you would wear your colourless shirt, or collarless shirt, sorry, I should say there, which again is other things I've been learning, looking up for when we're talking about these things, made in what is described as Angola wool. So what on earth is Angola wool? I've got no idea where they get the phrase Angola from, because it's got nothing to do really with the country, it seems. But Angola wool is this blanket looking material, so it's thick, but it's 50% cotton and 50% wool, so it's a nice warm weave. Everyone always thinks, you know, when you look at one of these things and think how itchy that would be to wear for the first time, etc. Like so many things, actually, once you put it on, you've got used to it, you get over all of that, and the itchiness is not what your biggest problem is. So again, in a lot of photographs in the Second World War, especially in warmer weather, you'll see the guys, tank crews, wearing, British tank crews, Canadian, Commonwealth as well, these shirts, sleeves rolled up, off they go about their business, and battle dress trousers beneath. When it gets a little bit colder, on comes a battle dress top. And again, as I say, if you look as well, North Africa, they're wearing combinations of this, Italy, Northwest Europe, right across the world, that battle dress blouse combination, it sort of seems to be there at some point. Now, at the same time, they've made a set of denims on the same design. So this is made of this green denim material that, again, it looks just like battle dress blouse, and it's the way it's cut, it's put together. But again, it's easier from the point of view of washing all the time. It's not that thick serge, and it's considered by many as almost like workwear. And different types of overalls that are just denim overalls. They're not issued specifically for tank crews. They're issued across different parts of the army, so that you'd be wearing those doing any sorts of mucky jobs. Those denim two-part blouse or overalls are being worn to basically try and keep your better uniform, your battle dress blouse or your number 2 dress if you're still wearing it, trying to keep all the muck off it. So what about the specific, coming on to the idea of the tank suits, etc. Now, out in North Africa, so first of all, if you look at the 1940 campaign, BF, etc., we can say there that most of the chaps there, when you look at them, are either wearing just normal workwear overalls over their uniforms. Most of them are wearing a battle dress blouse. Some of them are still wearing number 2 dress. When it comes out to North Africa, one of the problems, of course, there is you've got this massive temperature fluctuation. So you've got the guys there in some of the shops, first thing in the morning, they're wearing great coats, they've got balaclavas on. The desert is freezing at night, so you can see them wearing pretty much everything. But of course, during the heat of the day, that causes other problems. So one of the things that, again, they start wearing shorts, they get Airtex, which is a way of sort of basically weaving the cloth. So if you're looking at shirt material, shorts, etc., lots and lots of little holes in his Airtex. And those uniforms are starting to issue. And famously with the 8th Army, the combination of what they wore becomes something, this idea that, you know, there was a set outfit or set uniform. Montgomery, when he's in charge, is pretty relaxed about, as long as they fight well, I don't really care what they look like and wear, although even he gets a bit carried away once or twice where he gets a bit miffed when too many of the guys are walking around. I think there's a story about where he drives past a couple of lorries coming the other ways, and they're to the 2 guys driving the lorries completely naked, apart from a pair of boots and a top hat on. So orders do go out about trying to not make you look too outrageous, but traditional, you know, this idea of the 8th Army, the whole point about them there when they're out there, it's what works for them and what is comfortable, what keeps you warm at night, what makes you feel relaxed, and what is comfortable to wear within the actual environment of the tank. So again, you'll see all those lovely images of cavalry officers with corduroys on, nice different stripy scarves, everything else around their necks. People tended to wear what they felt comfy in and what they could get hold of. And again, I'll talk about other things like, you know, the idea of the desert boot. We can talk about that if we talk about footwear on another one. But again, so overall, this idea, what do you protect yourself with? One of the things they come up with is a set of overalls specially to wear out in the desert. And these have particularly larger armhole vent holes underneath. You can see they sometimes describe these particular ones as overalls as Indian pattern. Again, it wasn't specifically for the tank crews. You'll see other people wearing these as overalls, but you do see them being used out there. And this particular set, it's actually stamped. It was made, whereas if I find there we are in the collar there. This particular set was actually made in Calcutta. Those of you who like this sort of stuff, you know, where does all these things come from, etc. This is unissued. You can see it's all still got its creases on. Some years ago, we went to a military vehicle show, and some chaps were coming over from Denmark. They brought stock every time. Bales of these things, wartime dated, lots of different dates. This particular pair is 45. I've got another pair, 43, 44. And they had this peculiar continental stamps in, Danish stamps as well, crown marks there. And yet they got the original British War Department broad arrow and wartime dates, sometimes Calcutta manufacturers. And the story goes, what had happened was Denmark had had a major flood, and they'd gone to their emergency supply stores where they kept things, you know, sensible things that they kept there in case of an emergency, including bales and bales of these, folding paratroopers bike, all dated wartime stuff. And of course this stuff all came out, and after it had either been used or you know, is this honestly something we want to put back in the stores? It's probably not got great value now, or we do it in a different way. So these were all flogged off. So these are wartime dated desert, you might call them desert pattern. There wasn't an official name called for that, but overalls that you'll see in many of those tank crews wearing out in North Africa. And another one of these where all this stuff, you know, I know some people are asking, where does this stuff come from? And it's surprising what stocks are still there that then emerge and, you know, rare as hen's teeth, and the next minute everyone's got a pair, and then of course as time moves on again they seem to become rarer again. Now, it looks like from the paperwork that in Britain, the very first type of proper tank suit designed specifically as an overall for tank crews. It has a pistol pocket, so you can keep the pistol in there. You don't have to have a belt that you might catch on things. It has a loop over the back of the shoulders, so should you be wounded in a tank, someone can grab that loop. It's stitched in such a manner that it's strong enough to be able to, with you and perhaps a couple of other people, pull that wounded person out of a vehicle through the hatch, because that's one of the problems they've got with wounded people inside a tank. If they're not conscious, how do you get them out? And that design was put into production, we think, in about 41, 42. Now, there's someone whose name I couldn't find his actual name, but he's done a fair bit of research. He's been off to the National Archives trying to pin down what happens about the dating and who designed these tank suits for Britain at the time. Because that early tank suit, it wasn't very popular. It has issues about breathability. Some of the guys are really hot. And it seems to take forever to come out to the troops when fairly early on the request is put in, or the need is obviously seen and is there, especially for guys serving out in the desert. And the Medical Research Council are put in charge of looking at how can we make better equipment for the serving soldiers. But in the paperwork, this chap who went to the archives, he can see that basically the frustration is building because they are taking too long to come up with things. And what they are coming up with, you know, they want to go off and do experiments for ages and do other testing on this stuff. So it doesn't seem to be getting very far. So it looks like, and not 100% certain, but this is supposition here, in something like the later half of 1942, the board from the army that are actually tasking the Medical Research Council with this have decided, no, we're going to have to come up with something sooner. And it looks like, and I say this looks like because we've got no absolute proof, but the three types of suits that are then ultimately go into service as the key types are probably designed at about the same time, even if their issuing and manufacture is not at the same time. Because again, when you think about it, it'll be priority. What's next? What do we need first? But that idea that we come up with a denim tank suit for summer wear for crews, a winter tank suit, which becomes the famous Pixie suit, and a jungle tank suit for use in the Far East, which is adapted particularly for the conditions out there. And when you look at those three designs, which we've got here, which we can see next to each other, you'll see there's a lot of similarities. And the point that's picked up by this researcher is just those pencil pockets. Why have they all come up with exactly the same pencil pockets, which, however useful, is not like a key consideration in a tank suit, and yet all three of those different types have got that same pencil pocket. So we know that the denim tank suit is in common usage if you look at the photographs prior to D-Day. So whether it's being manufactured in 43, we know some of the Pixie suits, Pixie suits found clearly labelled 43, but we know they don't get out to the troops till about September 44. And the jungle suit, it looks like, I've seen no photographic evidence that it actually gets to the troops in the Far East. Most are dated 1945, and I have a feeling that because of the dropping of the bomb, actually these are not issued to the tank crews, but they never get quite that far till post-war. So let's have a look. What are these different things? So here we've got an example. This one is not actually wartime dated. This is a post-war one of the denim tank suit, as it's called. Labels for most of these just inside the jacket. Labels, sadly, on most of the British stuff, that's one of the first things that wears when these get washed all the time. The labels aren't that permanent. But this particular one's dated 1952. Pencil pockets. Inside, this one, as many were, they should have braces that go over the top. So the idea was you put the braces on inside the suit, you can take the sides down, so wrap your these two, tie them up around the front, and if you're particularly hot, so you're not having to take off if you haven't got your trousers on underneath or whatever, you can still be working, but with the braces just holding up the lower half. Pencil pockets, as I mentioned there, two pockets there, one on the leg and a wound dressing pocket on the front here. Placket front, in other words, the buttons are hidden over like that way, and there's the buttons underneath. Again, the idea there, part of that is to try and stop things being snagged. There is a belt on it, and this one's still got here again. Sometimes people cut those off, but nice and roomy, and it tended to be, again, when you look at these, they're being worn sometimes in the height of the summer, sometimes with very little underneath. Sometimes they're being worn with that shirt we looked at earlier, the collarless shirt underneath, sometimes full battle dress and these over the top. But as you can imagine, these are items, and we can talk about with the Pixie suit as well, these are items that quite often got used after the war. You did, when you were servicing your car, you put these on. So many of them that are still out there have either got the signs of wear and tear, or oil spots, which tends to rot the fabric over time. So this pair as well, one of the points I wanted to make here is also when you put it against other pairs of the same material, you can see there how the colouring changes. As it washes, it gets lighter inevitably. But that's your denim tank suit, issued just before D-Day. The ACI, the Armoured Council instructions, officially says they're issued in September 44. Absolute rubbish, because we can see them in all the images. All the guys in Normandy, lots of them are wearing those, and so they're out to the troops, which is why, again, looking at the photographic evidence, if you just take it from the paperwork, it's not always matching up to the photographic evidence there. Now, in September of 44, it tends to be the time you see for the first time the old classic Pixie suit comes out. What we've got with the Pixie suit is something that the tank crews really liked. They realised it had been designed very much with them in mind, and because from September onwards and the winter of 44-45 was freezing cold out in Europe, these were really liked because they were warm. And what do you get when you get a Pixie suit? Well, just taking a look at this fella here, what it is, it's got two zips that go right the way down the front to the bottom. You can zip you all the way down there, take yourself apart. I keep reading that they claim that you can zip these legs together in a manner that makes kind of like a hollow sleeping bag. I've never had to go and tried it myself yet. And I also read that it's got supposedly 13 pockets. I've counted up as many as I can. I only get to about 11, but there we are. That's one of those fun things you can do at home if you've got your tank suit. It has underneath this lighter coloured canvas cotton cloth, it's also rubberized, and unfortunately the rubber quite often starts going off depending on its storage conditions over time. Hence you get this slightly darker effect. Top surfaces, not everything was rubberized. Top surfaces, so shoulders, arms, top of your legs, etc., they were rubberized so that, again, if you're out of the top, hopefully you're not getting wet. It is Angola wool again, so sometimes they describe it as blanket lined. It's basically shirt material lined inside. You can see that for warmth. Yet again, if I just open these fronts here, it's got the bracing system so that, again, you can wear that over, so you can take the top layer, the top part down. It's got those pockets again, again, inside you've got what is often described as storm cuffs. So again, stops that idea of the wind whistling up there, or even worse, rain, etc. So they're actually elasticated little cuffs inside, again to try and keep you warm. And again, pockets in interesting places. Imagine yourself sat in a vehicle. Some pockets aren't going to be accessible. Some on your legs are probably easier. So this is a well thought through item and becomes a model undoubtedly for an awful lot of tank suits, many of which are still in service to this day. This particular one, by the way, I just showed you there. If you're looking for where it's actually the label is, it's always in the on the right hand sleeve there. This particular one is actually just made after the war. Sizes, size number 6, which means again, sizing, another whole issue with British Army clothing. But if you go on the internet, tap into Google, British Army clothing sizes, wartime ones, battle dress has a huge variety of sizing because of the different sizes of people. These is much less so, so you've only got about 7 or 8 different sizes for things like tank suits. This is 6, which evidently in the old days when I was buying this stuff, I tried to buy it even though I never wore it. That means it's for 6'1" to 6'2", breast 42 inches to 44 inches, waist 38 to 46, leg seam 34 inches by G&IR company with a broad arrow. And technically at this time they were calling them oversuits tank crew without hood. And of course, one of the points that's here with all the belts, buckles and everything, it actually has studs on the back, so you could have a separately attachable hood, which gave it this name, again, blanket lined inside, same material, gave it the nickname Pixie suit because of this little pointy bit. As if you look at children's literature at the time, pixies with the little pointy hats on, etc. Hence the Pixie suit. And when you look at these, as I mentioned, they're issued from about September. They start appearing in the troops. There's much talk about, were they around beforehand? No photographic evidence that there's people wearing them before then. But in things like Bill Bellamy's book, he doesn't like it because he thinks the canvas colour is too light, and he sees a colleague has been killed and he wonders if it's because of that colouring has made him more, jumps out in him a little bit more. There are other accounts where they do like them because of the warmth, the accounts of the fact that all of a sudden they all look clean until they get grubby. It's one of those garments that most of the chaps, there's one in the Imperial War Museum where the guy who actually wore it, he was captured, he wore it all through the winter, and he says, this was a godsend because when he was in a prisoner of war camp, this was a thing that kept him warm, kept him going, etc. So, and again, another whole thing about psychology is about clothing, coats, what makes you look good, what makes soldiers look smart, what makes you feel comforted, and the sheer practicalities of when things are going wrong. And for example, the temperature's dropping, something like that just makes you feel good because it does seem to be keeping you dry, keeping you warm, and there's just something when you put one of these sorts of things on, you feel snug, which is another weird thing, but a bit of a truism. So there's the British Army's Pixie suit. Now they also did a camouflage version of the Pixie suit, and here we can see one. It's had a bit of an interesting life. It's a little bit worn. There's some little bit of damage on the back. But again, this is actually a wartime dated one. So if I take you around. Now the interesting thing again, it is quite hard finding any imagery of these actually being issued during the war years themselves. But they were carrying on, just like the Pixie suit, they carried on making them post-war. This particular one is dated 1944, and again it's size number 6. But it's a different camouflage as well. It's not exactly, we can talk about camouflage on another film, but it's not actually the same as the Denison smock that sometimes people think it is. But exactly the same as the standard tan-coloured Pixie suit. The only difference with this one is you've ended up having it in this camouflage material. And these you'll see, these tank suits being used on exercises, issued to troops. There's photographs going 60s, early 70s, people are still wearing these. The third in that lineup, I mentioned the fact about these tank suits being designed probably all together. The third, there's those pencil pockets, just again, which kind of makes you feel like, was this something all done at the same time? This is called the Jungle tank suit and was specifically designed for wearing out in the Far East. Again, this one I don't think was ever issued. It's got some storage issues. That's another thing when these things are being sat in about, my damn attic, they all start rotting. I've sadly found the bloody rats and mice have been at a couple of these things as well. But this one, again, it's another one of those ones that I mentioned earlier. We don't think it actually got to the troops before the end of the actual fighting, but they seem to have been issued around the place a bit later on. This one's dated 1945. Again, it's tank suit jungle, size number 6, big size again. Other differences, more air holes to keep air circulating. Pockets again looking very much like the denim one. Belt. Inside, yet again, you've got those braces so you can hold them up, support it. The one big difference that you can see is this lovely little trapdoor arrangement at the back there, which means that instead of having to take all your oversuit, your whole tank suit off to use the latrines, if you're going to have to sit down somewhere, you can just peel that bit back, a couple of buttons there, and off you go. And that also potentially stops some of those wonderful latrine horror stories that you hear about tankers, because you imagine you go in a latrine somewhere, you take off the top of your overall, unknowingly, unfortunately, in some occasions, that's dropped down the back into the actual latrine, and the next moment the poor guy's been quietly crapping down the back of his tank suit, which never goes down too well. But the denim tank suit there, it's got that little emergency trapdoor on the rear, which again, designed with some of these ideas in mind, that they're thinking through what are going to be the sort of things that would make it much more useful for you. So there's the denim one there, sorry, the jungle one. So just looking at these other types of tank suits, I just thought I'd do a contrast here. This one is an unissued denim tank suit. It's actually dated slightly later. This is post-World War II. This is 53. And again, I just thought I'd show you from the point of view of, on that, the colouring is much richer because it hasn't been washed that number of times. But again, you can have a look at these at the end when we do those still photographs. But that's a 1953, again following the same pattern as the wartime ones. But I hear you say, I can hear you all asking that question: how can I tell the difference between a denim tank suit or tank overalls and a denim normal overalls? Well, I will show you, because there next to it is the standard normal denim overalls, and amazingly, by pure chance, these two here, so there's the tank one with those extra pockets, the pencil ones on the top there, there's the standard normal ones, denim overalls without those pencil pockets, less pockets there around it, and amazingly both of these are dated the same year, 1953. So, but again, they follow till later on, after the war, immediately they're following that wartime pattern. Now, just before coming to the end of those wartime tank suits, just as a bit of an example, this is what the American tankers, American clothing designed out in the States in the early 1940s, it's starting to get issued, ready for, you'll see, again, depending on the photographic evidence, you'll see some of these different tanker suits being used, certainly back in Britain beforehand. The tanker suit for the Americans is very popular because it's quite a stylish jacket, and obviously everyone still wears them today, all these repro ones. But the tanker suit, again, it's got blanket line, so American Army blanket lining, which makes it nice and warm. And because of the cuffs, this elasticated, that keeps it tight to the body to keep you warm. And underneath, for this is winter weight clothing, so you'd be wearing this in cold weather climates. There's padded, again, the same arrangement, trousers with a bib and braces on the top, bib and brace arrangement there that you'd wear for cold weather. And again, if you look at American tank through, they've got those herringbone weave overalls as well. They're wearing a lot of just normal American Army issued kit throughout the rest of the year, but this with the tanker's jacket, and like some of these, you know, with the whole thing about the military, it's clothing, where you feel or you want to be identified as a bit of an elite, these bits of uniform, such as the Denison smock for paratroopers in Britain, the American jump boots for American paratroopers, tankers jackets like this, that slight sense of this is also not just practicality, it's identifying me as being part of this special unit or something that's a bit different sort of thing. So these tankers jackets, hugely popular, and lots of other people were trying to get hold of them, using them in different areas. But just an example there of the American ones. I can't do every nation, unfortunately, I haven't got that many to be able to have a look at. But following on that Pixie suit, the famous British ones from the cold weather one, I just thought I'd show you, here's an example why they're all still going. This is a modern, actually issued for, there we are, the Dutch Army one. Looks very similar, same two zip patterns. There's a fly one there in the front, just as a Pixie suit have. Pockets down the legs. This again, nowadays inside they actually have a carrying strap to pick up over, and there's a hood hidden under there in the back. Again, straps so that you can be lifted out. Very sensible, practical ideas if you're inside there. This one is made of one of these materials which, if you see some of the modern tank suits, some of them are very clearly stamped for exercise only. When you issue the ones that have got flame retardant material, Nomex, etc., they won't last. That flame resistance doesn't last that long. It doesn't last that many washes. So they quite often, certainly in the British Army, you train in suits that are designed just for daily wear. If you've got the risk of combat, where the idea of a fire or some sort of damage to the vehicle it goes up, obviously, that's when they issue or you take out your actual flame retardant suits. But that Dutch one, there's lots of different nations. I just put that one there just as a bit of an example of the more modern ones, but you can see how many of them are still following those wartime basic principles of those 3 British ones, which is keep your pockets all over the place so you can stow stuff. Make sure as well, from the point of view of those, you don't give too many places to get snagged on when you're trying to get in and out of a vehicle in a bit of a hurry. You can imagine that, under 5 seconds to evacuate a vehicle. That was what they were aiming for before it goes up in flames if you're hit. The last thing you want is suddenly all those things. But we can talk about one or two of the other bits and pieces, like some of the webbing that was worn, helmets, footwear, in a slightly separate video. And I know I've waffled on a fair old bit on this one. As I say, we'll put those photographs up at the end of this, but there you've had a bit of a potted history on British tank suits and some of the principles behind them, mainly the Second World War ones. And we'll see what we can do for next time. And now I've got to pack all this blooming stuff up and find somewhere to put it back up in the attic. We are a charity here at the Tank Museum, so if you can support us, please do. Consider joining our Patreon scheme or becoming a member of the Friends. Any donations will go directly towards the Tank Museum and its activities.